This video took me much longer than planned. Our entire team worked for months to make the most complete version of Doom's history possible at the moment. If you found any errors, inaccuracies, or think we missed something important, please write about it in the comments. A huge thank you in advance to everyone for watching this video. We're extremely grateful to all of you. Sit back and pour yourself a drink to your taste. Thanks again. Enjoy watching. Probably each of you at least once heard what Doom is. Hell, I am more than sure that you even saw how one of your friends, if not you yourself, played this game. Doom is one of the largest and brightest phenomena in the history of video games. This game literally changed the course of history and gave the green light to many projects that became part of the childhood of many of us. I am a big fan of Doom, and those who have known me for long enough know this very well. So reviews of this series of games were only a matter of time. However, I can't just suddenly start fully reviewing game after game, at least until I have explained to you how this series of games was created and developed. Welcome to the video where I will tell you the entire 30-year journey of Doom from the very beginning to the present day. I spent a lot of time collecting material for this video. Our entire team worked for a long time to ensure that this study, so to speak, came to light. Therefore, I ask you to like and subscribe if you have not subscribed yet, and also click the bell button and recommend the video to your friends. At the end of the video I will remind you of this again, and also, please write a comment, they help to promote the video. This is very important. Thank you very much. In this video, the story will go in order. That is, I will start with the first part of Doom and finish with Doom the Dark Ages. For easier and clearer perception, I divided the video into episodes, so feel free to switch between them if needed. Our story begins back in 1991. That's when its software was created. Now known for such projects as Doom, Wolfenstein, Quake, and others. I think it's worth starting with the founding of the company, and although there were still 2 years between then and the release of Doom, without those 2 years maybe Doom itself wouldn't have existed. Even before creating their own studio, the members of it worked at Softdisk, but not having received the necessary enthusiasm, they began making games themselves in secret. That's how Commander Keen came to light. And the company was named Ideas from the Deep, which later evolved into In Demand, and then was shortened to id. Now you know what that mystical id stands for. Well, if you didn't know before, of course. The most influential predecessor of Doom was Wolfenstein 3D, released on May 5th, 1992. It was this game which created the foundations of the very dynamic shooter that developed and were improved in Doom. The game told a story of a soldier named William B.J. Blazkowicz, who had to escape from the castle Wolfenstein while breaking through crowds of German soldiers. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? The first part of Doom was released on December 10th, 1993. Initially, Doom consisted out of 1 free and 2 paid episodes and was conceived as a multiplayer cooperative game, at least according to the Doom Bible. The Doom Bible is a book that can be found online, which describes various ideas, plot fragments, and ideas that were partially included or not included into the finished game. The idea of a multiplayer shooter perfectly shows how much it wanted to improve first-person shooters. There were going to be 4 playable characters, a competitive aspect, and some sort of leaderboard. This later evolved into points and time in which the player completed a level. The game still has these aspects to this day. Despite the fact that the original idea with 4 players did not work out, and the game itself in the final version acquired a completely different look, some innovations that amazed players were still achieved. In essence, Doom 1993 is not a 3D game. It is so-called 2.5D game, All textures here are two-dimensional, like the whole game. However, they're projected in such a way as to create the effect of three-dimensional space. Previously, similar techniques were done using tiles, which made them more resource-intensive. It came up with the ID Tech technology, which allowed to create three-dimensional space without reducing performance. At the same time, the game had dynamic lighting and even opening doors, as well as elevators. The only downside was that it was impossible to make floor above a floor. In this regard, Doom was very different from Wolfenstein. Now, the height and angles of the ceilings and floors could be freely chosen. Check out Decino, he can tell you about this in more understandable language. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. I, on the other hand, will continue. Thus, Doom became not only the most accessible, but also the most popular game that could be obtained at the time. Moreover, the most progressive. People all over the world could not tear themselves away from their computer screens enjoying Doom. Doom may have been a simple arcade game, but it was the game that invented the technological and design tools that allowed first-person shooters to evolve into survivor horror games like Amnesia, puzzle games like Portal, and platformers like Mirror's Edge. So yes, Doom can be said to have created the way for many now famous and beloved games. In fact, Doom's gameplay itself was startling at the time. Some might say, yeah, you don't say. But you know, when your competitors are this, then you will clearly stand out on their background, especially if you are Doom. Let's discuss some of the features of Doom's gameplay in a little more detail to better understand what gamers of the time were dealing with. The monsters in the game are pretty dumb, because their program is pretty simple. In fact, their main task is to trigger on the player and attack them. They do not have tactical thinking, at least in the first parts, but simply mindlessly attack the player as soon as they notice. Something similar to animal behavior appeared, as it seems to me, more in Doom 2016. Among other things, monsters could sometimes attack each other. For example, if an imp's ball hit a Pinky or any other monster, it would immediately forget about the player and run to fight back. It looks especially funny in Doom 2016, where demons could not only fight, but also successfully kill each other. In this way, I was able to skip small arenas. I think it was because the arena's skipping problem that the mechanics in Doom Eternal were slightly changed, and now demons just visually fought but did not cause damage to each other, which I think is not the best solution. Health and armor were displayed as percentages. If earlier armor absorbed some percentage of damage, which will always remain difficult for me to calculate, then in modern parts of Doom it essentially gives you HP on top. That is, you have 100 HP and plus 50 HP on top because of the armor, something like that. I don't even know what I as a gamer like more. Perhaps the main key to creating a good game at id was the ability to agree and give each other free rein to their imagination. Ideas came from different sides, but they sounded more like, hey, I have a cool idea, why not shove it into our game? According to Kevin Cloud, there were almost no reworks and tests, as well as a full-fledged process of creating and development. There were only ideas brought to life. Now, it seems that this does not work very well. Many of you know an example of this very well. However, then a simple indie studio managed to make maybe somewhere simple but terribly exciting game which is relevant to this day. In fact, the id team consisted of more people than John Romero and John Carmack. The designer and programmers simply became the most famous members of the team, bringing more influence to the creation of a masterpiece, combining the boldest ideas at the time and giving birth to one of the most significant first-person shooters. However, in addition to them, the team also included designers Sandy Peterson, American McGee and Sean Green, artists Adrian Carmack and Kevin Cloud, programmer Dave Taylor and composer Bobby Prince, as well as their leader Tom Hall. It was all thanks to those guys that Doom was born. Everything in Doom, both before and now, was aimed at fast and long gameplay, essentially at the survival of the player within the location and the map as a whole. Let me explain. We have refillable things such as health, armor and ammo, as well as weapons that can be picked up as you progress. In the first parts of the game, any weapon was a useful tool against any of the demons. Does it shoot quickly? Great! You can stun a crowd of freaks in one fell swoop. Does it stun well and deal a lot of damage? We're talking about the chainsaw. Great! We will cut down a large demon in close combat, so that he does not interfere later. Previously, the chainsaw was precisely a weapon, and not an insta-kill as in Doom 2016 and Eternal, and was needed more for fun than for refilling the ammo. So here it is. While the player is running and fighting demons in one location, there will usually be well-placed first aid kits or ammunition, which will allow the player to survive longer in combat conditions. A more illustrative example would be Doom Eternal, where everything works for speed and survivability. Demons here are not only enemies, but also a resource. Want more ammo? Cut them with a chainsaw. Want more armor? Set them on fire. There are even special upgrades for survival, so to speak. For example, an upgrade that allows you to get some ammunition from explosive red barrels. It works especially well in combination with an upgrade that restores those same barrels. In general, from the very launch of Doom and to this day, the game follows the frantic speed and fun gameplay. Only now it can be more diverse. In Doom Eternal, for example, they almost got rid of the spheres that used to be worth their weight in gold. Even in Doom 2016, various spheres were here and there, giving the player temporarily berserk powers, allowing you to tear demons with your bare hands, or quadruple damage, and so on. However, Doom is not only crazy speeds and mindless shooting at demons, but also exploration, for which the game generously rewards with new weapons, which should have appeared in the game much later. So is the same in Doom 2016. The same mechanics are also in effect, which, although it can affect the balance, however, forces the player to be more careful and explore the environment. Of course, for the same task in the game there are collectibles, which will be better developed in Doom Eternal, but I will talk about this later. So, Doom 1993 was a huge success. It literally created a huge boom in the gaming industry and launched an unstoppable process of arcade shooter development. A sequel under such conditions was only a matter of time. Doom 2 Hell on Earth was officially released on September 30, 1994 in the USA and on October 10th of the same year, but already in Europe. Since the main base for the game already existed, meaning the code and other data, the development took only about 8 months. The only new thing in the game was the division into episodes, a new type of weapon and several new types of enemies. Everything else was the same as in the first part of Doom. Afterwards, the game was ported to many other platforms. According to plot, the second part begins immediately after the events of the first. And yes, believe it or not, there is plot in Doom. There always was, in fact, there was just no particular focus on it. Before Doom 2016 from the canonical parts and Doom 3 from the non-canonical ones, I guess. In any case, about the reboots later. And I will tell you more about the plot of the parts one by one directly in the videos themselves for these parts, when I analyze everything in detail. Of course, the new part received even more sympathy from critics and players and became the best-selling game of id Software at the time. It even won the Origin Awards in 1995 as the best game in fantasy and science fiction style of 1994. There are as many as 32 levels in the game, but for the Germany version of the game there are 30, because 2 secret levels used German military of the 1940s and their symbols. Well, you know that Wolfenstein and Doom are one universe, right? Well, now you know for sure. Commander Keen is also included in it, by the way. And by the way, YouTube, we're not talking and showing real people here. These are all characters from the game. Well, I say it just in case. You know, if suddenly YouTube doesn't like that I'm telling you something about Wolfenstein here. In fact, we've gotten so deep into the code and the amazing aspects of Doom 1993 that there's almost nothing to talk about in Doom 1994. I mean, as I said, the development of the game wasn't much different from the first part, nor were the techniques in it. In general, I'll say that Doom 1994 was another hit in the series of games, and it was the one that gave birth to such a thing as Final Doom. We'll talk about it further. Released on May 31st, 1996 and created by Team TNT under the management of id Software, Final Doom, in my opinion, is not really an official part of the Doom series. Initially, the TNT team was a community of more than 100 modders who wanted to release a free mob collection, aka VAD, for Doom, but John Romero interfered and offered to commercialize the project. This is how Final Doom was born, consisting of 2 episodes with 33 levels each. In this part, the levels were visually richer. More animated textures, invisible sectors were used somewhere. In general, the game itself became more colorful, if I may say so. The developers of the project tried to use all the capabilities of the engine and stretch it to the maximum. I think it is also worth noting that the soundtrack of the first episode consisted mainly of new compositions, while the second episode was a combination of music from Doom 1 and Doom 2. By the way, in the same 1996, Doom got something really cool. A 16-page comic. Now, of course, it's more of a relic for collectors than something that has any relation to the plot and canon, and in general, it's just a cool thing that exists as additional content for fans. Just for fun, I suggest you to take a look. Maybe you'll come across some familiar phrases. Yeah, exactly. These are the same phrases used in Brutal Doom modification. And yes, they were taken from here. Here, Doom Guy is just nuts and really brutal. I don't know if it's cool or funny. Probably funny. Of course, this Doom Guy differs from the canonical Silent Brute, at least in that he's very talkative. But damn, look at him, how funny he is. So, the game developed, the community burned with a bright flame of freedom and interest. Encouraged by the developers, it created its own maps, mods, its own stories, from the stupidest and funniest to the most terrific and traumatic. Now the community is overflowing with various good projects, and probably one day I will review them, but now we're talking about the development of Doom itself. Its classic version, let's say. Final Doom simply deserved to be mentioned as a large part of the game's history. Little by little, we moved to 1997. Mario 64 was released a year earlier. Nintendo 64 was a hit at the time. A great console which was worth making a game for. Of course, Doom got in there too. It's funny to note that id Software once wanted to work with Nintendo directly, but that was before the official studio was created. However, Nintendo refused them back then. Now, id Software was releasing a game called Doom 64 for the Nintendo console. Ironic and funny. In fact, I'm not quite right. The game's development itself was entrusted to Midway Games this time. Bethesda became the publisher, and id Tech adapted for Nintendo was still used in the development. It, of course, took over the project. Of course, because they own all the rights for the franchise. In the new Doom, perhaps everything that could has changed. Well, except for the gameplay, of course, although it, in my opinion, has become a little different. New textures and animations, a bunch of near puzzles, oppressive atmosphere, It sounds like I'm talking about Doom 3, but no. Doom 64 is filled with hopeless emptiness, and every demon scares the hell out of you. There aren't as many enemies as in the previous and subsequent parts, but there is a wonderful atmosphere of near horror in space. For many years, the game was only available for the Nintendo 64, and only 23 years later it received a port to the Nintendo Switch and other platforms. This happened in 2020. In fact, the game was originally planned to be released on the Nintendo Switch in 2019, but the release was postponed along with the release of Doom Eternal. Now the game can be played on PC, Xbox, PlayStation and Nintendo Switch. Also, a new episode which consisted out of 7 levels was added to the game, connecting the first parts of the game and the newest Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal plot. In fact, this terribly destroyed the foundations of the story and gave rise to many plot holes, but I will deal with this later. At least I will talk about it much later. Believe me, you'll be amused by how confusing everything is. Doom 64 itself became another hit in the series and interested the community and also received positive reviews from critics. The game was called the most beautiful in the series, noting also its creativity and complexity in terms of levels. In general, the new part was received very well, which means the series was obligated to continue. However, after such phenomenal success, Doom went through a bad streak. The game got the new part, a movie, a version for phones, but none of this was received nearly as well as the first 3 parts of the game. In fact, now none of the listed in this video segment relates to the main series and is not connected to it in terms of plot. I'm not sure, to be honest, that anyone will even remember any of this, because it has been lost in the centuries as deeply as possible. Despite this, Doom 3 has fans, which is generally not surprising. As they say, Doom 3 is not Doom, but it is a wonderful survival horror. But still, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so let's take it in order. Doom 3 was developed by id Software, published by Activision and released on August 3rd, 2004. The idea of re-releasing and reimagining the game came to John Carmack in 2000. At the same time, he published a plan to start a remake of Doom using next-generation technologies. In general, there were initially disputes in the company about this decision, but in the end an agreement to work on a new part was concluded and development began. In 2001 the game was first shown to the general public, and in 2002 a 15-minute gameplay demo of the game was shown. The game was officially released in the United States on August 3rd, 2004. It's funny that 2 days before the official release, Doom 3 was illegally distributed on the internet, which makes it almost the fastest illegally distributed game of all time. The game was designed as a single-player game. Well, not surprising, it's a horror game. And yes, this part was in the genre of survival horror, which, it would seem, does not quite fit Doom. And this really turned out to be so. Despite the familiar atmosphere in many ways, demons, weapons, a huge scientific complex and everything else, the game was aimed at slow gameplay, which greatly destroyed the usual ideas about Doom. Despite the fact that Doom 3 was not Doom in the usual sense, it was still an excellent survival horror, especially considering the general atmosphere. The game was extremely dark and dirty, with dirty grey-black shadows, narrow corridors and sharp corners from which a demon was constantly trying to jump out at the player. Plus, the player did not have the ability to simultaneously hold a gun and a flashlight. And knowing how impenetrable the darkness could be in the next room, the player had to choose between shooting blindly and being able to see but not fight. In some ways, this is reminiscent to the formula of Resident Evil, a third-person survival horror where the camera angle did not allow you to see the enemy in some rooms and you had to shoot blindly, wasting precious ammo. In between, Doom 3 also managed to prize the player for research and exploration, In some audio recordings, you can find codes for locked safes with first aid kits, ammo, and so on. Doom 3 is addictive, especially if you're a fan of the genre, because it does everything right. The storytelling, the atmosphere, it all keeps you on the edge throughout the game, and that would be great if people didn't remember Doom as an arcade shooter at ultra speed. I think it's worth adding that the maximum difficulty of Doom 3 also played both on hardcore and on horror. Due to the constant limitation on HP, which does not allow you to be above a certain number, and the limitation of ammo, despite good damage, the maximum difficulty of Doom 3 makes you be wary and careful, thinking through every step. Of course, it is assumed that you have completed the game at least once before diving into the hardest mode. And this is the most interesting thing. After all, Doom 3... I better tell you about this in a separate video. Overall, the problem with Doom 3 wasn't that it was a bad game. I'd even say it fit the genre very well and played like a great survival horror in many ways. The problem was the genre chosen. From the next part of the franchise consisted of a fast-paced arcade shooters that are famous for their dynamism, people expected, a fast-paced shooter. People expected it to fit the genre, not some horror story in space. Even though Doom 64 was also somewhat reminiscent of a horror story in space, it was still a shooter and quite dynamic. It matched what people were used to and generally lived up to expectations. The sudden horror outraged the community. Doom 3 is not part of the main storyline now, but look, it's a great survival horror. The problem is that survival horror games are much slower than arcade shooters. This is what became the stumbling block and marked the beginning of a black streak in the history of Doom series. A year later, on September 13, 2005, the Doom RPG, God forgive me, comes out. This is a kind of Doom port to mobile devices developed by id Software and Fountainhead Entertainment. Probably no one would have thought that after a horror, Doom would suddenly turn into a turn-based RPG. And here we are, it turned. Now it is impossible to play either the first or the second part of the RPG, unfortunately, and as you understand, I tried. And it is quite difficult to find gameplay recordings. However, you can find gameplay on the PC port. Naturally, this part of the game is connected with the plot of Doom 3 and generally takes a lot from it, but outwardly it resembles the first parts in the genre more. Even the monsters and weapons have almost all migrated here. There is also a HUD familiar to players. In fact, now there are a few people who remember little about Doom RPG. The game did not receive such success and, in general, was not particularly memorable to users. Well, what did you expect? The game was perhaps even slower than Doom 3, and in general, in my opinion, there is very little Doom about it. There is catastrophically little information about the game, rather there is none at all. Almost nothing is known about the development, when, who and what remains a mystery. It is known that the game had at least 3 versions with different texture resolutions and all sorts of improvements. The most that I can say about the gameplay here is a standard turn-based RPG for mobile phones in the style of Doom. Here are the usual demons, weapons, even the BFG brought in. Also in the game you can get experience and increase your level, which increases the stats of the main character. By the way, there are also places where you can buy heals, ammo and so on. In short, kind of store. In general, there is nothing else in the game except for small puzzles, conversations with people and battles. I think that Doom RPG is something special for special fans, but I am clearly not one of them. Doom RPG seems too slow and boring to me, especially considering the main genre of the original game. By the way, on November 23rd, 2009, the second part of Doom RPG was released. Doom 2 RPG. In general, I can't tell anything particularly new about this part, I just don't know what to add. Although, no, I know. The Doom 2 RPG version for iPhone contains a digital comic. The plot is a direct continuation of the first part. The game received normal reviews in general, even positive. Okay, so this is a quick digression from the video games. The thing is, Doom has a movie, and books. And I think we should shove all that into one segment, right while we're on the subject of franchise's dark streak. Because, oh boy, that's all counts to. In general, purely technically, only the novels for Doom 3 can be considered canon, and then only for Doom 3 itself, which is not canon to the main story at all. Yeah, it's confusing. But on the other hand, hey, they were written by the game's scriptwriters, so they're canon, for non-canon. But still canon. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's start with the movie. The first movie was released in 2005 and is almost 2 hours long. Now, I understand everything, of course, but oh my god, 2 hours? No, it's not that I don't have the attention span or anything, it's just the movie itself, how can I say it, sci-fi horror. Yeah, guess in 3 tries which part the movie was based on. Yeah, right. Surprisingly, with a budget of $60 million, the movie almost paid itself off, getting $58.7 million. Of course, I'm not a film reviewer, and I won't go into the storyline of the film or how it was shot, but I'll tell you a little about the film. Let's start with the cherry on the cake. Doom Guy is played by The Rock. Funny, right? It was funny to me too. No, well, the resemblance is obvious, what are you saying? Okay, that's it, I'll keep quiet. In fact, you can't really find fault with it, because the film is not canon at all. It is based on a highly modified plot of Doom 3, so Doom Guy can look like anyone here. Consider it as an alternate universe. In fact, to be honest, there were hints of a film based on the game universe back in 1993, when the first part of the game was released. At the time, however, the chance was not taken advantage of, and the project could not come to a logical conclusion for another 9 years. The film entered production only in 2004 under the supervision of Universal Pictures. In the end, no one really liked the film. Well, because... damn, what did you do with Doom? When did it turn into a Resident Evil in space? In short, something went wrong. Viewers and critics spat a little and essentially forgot about it. Now few people remember this film, maybe only to laugh at it. If they think that this is where the production of Doom movies ended, then ha! You guessed wrong. Let's jump forward a little along the timeline, because it is required here. To be more precise, we will move to 2019, when the movie Doom Annihilation was released. This time, the genre was chosen much more correctly: science fiction and action. This time the situation was a little better. The film still remained in the depths of the fandom since it was released straight to DVD, but it did not cause such an explosion as the first one. In fact, the film was supposed to be just an improved version of the first one, and it worked. At least according to critics, the film turned out to be more sensible than the first part. Plus, first-person scenes were removed, although they wanted to add them, which perhaps also played a special role. In fact, the film is not very good. It is a little better than the previous one and was less visible to public. Maybe that's why it was not crushed like an imp's skull from a shotgun blast. So let's move on to literature. In general, there were originally 4 books based on the Doom game series. The first book in the series came out in 1995, and the last one in 1996. Of course, all this is non-canon story, which is only based on the events of the game. However, the main character here is called Flynn Fly Taggart, which is the name that we meet again in Doom Eternal. Perhaps this is just a reference, but some players prefer to think that this is Doom Guy's name. Perhaps sometimes I will call him exactly this way due to a habit that appeared precisely because of the community. The books were called Knee Deep in the Dead, Hell on Earth, Infernal Sky, and Endgame respectively. The books themselves were written in the first person, and the narrator was Flint Taggart. However, instead of demons from hell, there were more demon-like aliens who attacked Mars and Earth. Besides everything else, Doom Guy also has a girlfriend here, with whom he spends his time in various adventures. Does this make the book less interesting? Well, to be honest, adding anyone with personal problems to the team of the initially tough Marine seems to make him softer and sloppier or something. Overall, the books try to convey the horror of the demonic invasion both from Flint's side and from the side of people, but it's quite difficult to perceive them knowing the canon. Someone on one of the forums said, "Teenagers might like it, but adults most likely won't be interested." For some, this series of books may be childhood, especially considering that the books were re-released in 2005 for Doom 3, but for me personally, it was so hard to read that I couldn't even get through the first book. Speaking of Doom 3, there are also short stories about it, and this time they really have a canon feel to them. They were written by the scriptwriter of Doom 3 after all. In fact, they also deviate a little from the canonical plot of Doom, but damn, I really liked these books. The story is about John Kane, a Marine who, having violated the orders of his commander, was sent to Mars, where the USC is already operating. In fact, it's a little funny that John Kane feels like a more real Doom Guy than Flint Taggart, although if you look at the games, the Marine from Doom 3 will look weaker compared to the others. In short, the name John Kane doesn't seem to suit him at all. That's what I'm talking about. There were supposed to be 3 novels in total, but the last one was cancelled for unknown reasons. So we have Worlds on Fire and Milestorm. I don't even know if I should advise those who haven't read these books to read them, but if you're really interested, then take note. At the very least, they show the world of Doom 3 from a different side, perhaps more familiar to fans of sci-fi action and arcade shooters. I especially like to think that John's local origin, that is the reason why he was sent to the USC, is canon. At least from the first parts, as far as I remember, we know that he violated the commander's order. So in general, let it be so. We most likely won't know the very beginning of the storyline of our favorite Marine anyway, so for now, we'll be in sweet ignorance, I think. That's it for the Black Mark of Doom. And since we've covered that part of the story, it's time to move on to the new Doom story, aka the franchise objection. If you want to support me with more than just liking and subscribing, consider checking out the link in the description. There you can donate any sum of money starting from $1. Any donation is appreciated. Thank you in advance. On May 13th, 2016, history happened. Doom was released. New, bright, fast and bloody Doom 2016, or simply Doom. The project was known back in 2008 when it was first announced. Since then, fans have been humbly awaiting a new Doom, which was planned as Doom 4 and then renamed to simply Doom. The game was developed from 2008 to 2013. At this time, its software became part of Bethesda. Over the years of development, I think you realized that something went wrong. At some points, the developers to reach a dead end, and Doom itself fell into production hell. The game was chaotic, crumpled, and incomprehensible, although the original goal of the game was quite straightforward, to tell about the appearance of hell on Earth. Sometime later, in 2013, the development was restarted, and a year later, in 2014, Bethesda said that those who pre-ordered a new part of Wolfenstein at the time would also receive access to the beta test of the new part of Doom. The new part returned to the roots of the franchise, focusing on speed of gameplay. Doom became incomparably fast compared to Doom 3, and maybe even to the first parts of Doom. Despite this, it was clearly not the speed limit, but more on that later. The new part also added new mechanics, such as glory kills and more thoughtful melee system. Let's start with my favorite, glory kills. The glory kill system became very convenient and fast, and most importantly, a bloody way to leave no trace of the demon. Instead of feeding the monster lead, it was enough to hit him in the face with a fist or pull out its own tooth to slaughter the beast with it. In this part, glory kills were especially bright, beautiful, and cruel. I think that through them, Doom guys showed much more strength than through glory kills in Doom Eternal. Among other things, glory kills could save you at the moment of impending death, since during the glory kill animation no damage was done to Doom guy. Melee combat in this part was special. Sometimes one hit was enough to knock out the demon right before the glory kill stage. In fact, using fists, especially in Berserk mod, was a special feeling. You immediately understand how strong a character you're playing for is. And of course, this has caused many challenges where people completed the game using only melee combat, or only a starting pistol. Fighting with fists against demons was not just cool, but very cool, especially with such visuals. The game looked magical, especially when the eyes came across familiar images of enemies from the first parts, like Pinky and Revenants. Many opponents migrated from the first parts of the game here, but in a modified format. In this part, the enemies did not have obvious weak points, but this did not make the game more boring. In addition to many old acquaintances, new demons were added, more precisely, rather to say interpretations of old demons in a new wrapper. For example, Archviles became summoners, and became much less dangerous than they were. And Arachnophrones did not appear in the game at all, well, except for the final boss, although this is essentially a separate enemy. The enemies themselves acquired a special intelligence. Now, when the player is not on the battlefield or the demons have not yet noticed them, they can fight with each other. Moreover, they can easily kill each other. So the demons developed animal behavior, and everyone has a different one, as I noticed. If you're a fan of watching from the sidelines like me, you could notice how a small flock of imps is trying to kill one large mancubus. The spectacle is interesting and funny. The main thing is that the demons do not notice and do not move onto Doom guy. In fact, it was possible to skip some arenas or parts of them. For example, I lost one of the small arenas because I stopped in front of it for a short time and then found out that the demons had already killed each other. And out of several revenants and imps with zombies, I only got a couple of imps. The rest were killed by their own kind. This made the game world look more alive and populated. Moreover, there were corpses of the workers in the UAC buildings themselves, which further complemented the picture of the demonic invasion. It was interesting that now parts of people could be used to advance through the mission, but more often than not, the necessary workers were dragged away somewhere by larger demons. The game also got an update system, and not just one. Now, as you explored the levels, you could not only find weapons that would be available to less cautious players further along the story, but also special chips for upgrading the Praetor suit, runes that give various buffs, weapon modifications, and collectibles in the form of small Doomguy figurines in different variations. The game received much more material to explore. Plus, the collection included not only various secret and not so secret things, but also codex entries that supplemented and explained the plot and lore of the game. The game told a story of two dimensions, Mars and Hell. Although, to be more precise, it focused on the history of the UAC itself and what happened there. In fact, it was a big story about a tragedy which occurred in one of the complexes, which was supplemented with all sorts of data on demons, the company's developments, and the employees themselves. Speaking of employees, Now, Doomguy is not the only one left alive. Moreover, the main antagonist of the game is also one of the surviving employees, Olivia Pierce. It was she who started the demonic invasion. However, in fact, she is not to blame for the connection with the demonic world. Now, Samuel Hayden, the director of the UAC, largely responsible for what happened. Oh, and also there is Vega, Hayden's supercomputer, who knows the answers to all questions, which is gonna be connected to the player. If Doomguy has an extreme dislike for Hayden, at least judging by how he wants to break any mechanism through which Hayden communicates, then Vega evokes only most pleasant feelings in him. In fact, Vega is the best companion that could have been put in this game. At least he is perceived much more pleasantly than the arrogant director of the UAC, who does everything for the sake of science and for good of humanity. Good can be seen in the form of destroyed buildings and corpses of people, apparently. Okay, I've already started to go deeper, and this video is not only about Doom 2016, though I would really like that. In addition to everything else, the game has new features. For example, the chainsaw is redesigned as a sorta insta-kill weapon. Now it is impossible to chop down a crowd of demons while simultaneously cutting through them like in the first parts. The chainsaw used to be a weapon but became a tool which allowed the player to get ammo from demons. In fact, it was intended that the player would use the chainsaw wisely only on small demons, but something went wrong and there were so many fuel cans that people preferred to use the chainsaw as an insta-kill on larger demons. Also, the game featured various grenades that allowed you to blow up groups of enemies. Moreover, there were even several types of grenades for different situations. And on the battlefield you could find spheres that gave various temporary buffs. Many people's favorite Berserk allowed, for example, to rip and tear demons to dust with Doomguy's bare hands. To make the game more interesting, bosses were added. And no, these are not the same bosses as the first parts of Doom. Well, damn, I'm not talking about the appearance, I'm talking about how the bosses are designed. Local bosses really are much more similar to the bosses we are used to in video games than just stronger demons. Just look at the Cyber Demon, perhaps the most striking and memorable boss of the entire game. Of course, this is Doomguy's main enemy since the first parts. Well, not the main one, but one of the most iconic. In addition to the behavior of the demons, a lot has changed. For example, the design of the enemies was radically different from what everyone was used to. The demons from the first parts were still recognizable, of course, but their appearance became more creepy and gloomy. The game as a whole acquired an oppressive atmosphere full of darkness, fear, and cybernetics. This was noticeable in literally everything, from the dirty colors of the environment and the designs of hellish creatures to the roaring soundtrack of the greatest Mick Gordon. The soundtrack of Doom 2016 is amazing. It's hard to say anything else, it's hard to describe the feelings it evokes. But this is the coolest music that could be put into such a game. As Mick himself says, he was asked not to use guitars in the soundtrack, but was allowed to use synths. No guitars? Okay, then there will be a chainsaw. And if you think I just made a funny joke, hell no. He sampled the sound of a chainsaw, so in Hellwalker, at one point you can hear the very same roar of a chainsaw from the game. Among other things, Mick tried to make the music so that it would reflect the atmosphere of the game as much as possible. The composer himself tells how he was interested in combining the sounds of mechanisms and technology with rock to get an unforgettable sound. If you are interested in learning more about the game's soundtrack, visit the description. There will be many useful links, including a video where Mick talks about his work on the music for the game. In addition to the single-player mode, the game had an extremely rich multiplayer. Players could compete with each other playing various game modes. In some, it was even possible to play as demons. For matches, you could get experience, which increased the levels and gave players all sorts of goodies, like new skins and other things. Initially, at the start of the multiplayer, there were 9 maps and 4 demons to play as. Among other things, players could receive various modules that gave them various kinds of buffs. The game also had Snap Map, a special mod that allowed some to create and others to play the created levels. SnapMap is a full-fledged tool that allows you to create both single-player and multiplayer maps for different mods, modifying and change AI, speed, and various parameters of demons. And for those who are too lazy to figure out or write down all the details of the level, an AI was made that places enemies itself. For completing levels or creating them, players received snap points, which allowed them to buy cosmetic items. Doom 2016 was the first game from the series that I played. To say that I was absolutely delighted then is to say nothing. It was the first game in fast-paced first-person shooter genre that I played. Before that, I played only Resident Evil 4 and 5, and was sincerely sure that shooters are not for me. It turned out that only third-person shooters are not for me. Fast and dynamic, it won my heart, although then I did not even suspect how slow Doom 2016 would seem to me when I started playing Doom Eternal. However, this video is starting to turn into some kind of Doom 2016 review, to be honest. On the other hand, please understand me, I love this game madly. I can't help but tell you a little more about it. However, there is a game that I like even more than Doom 2016. But first, about what came after Doom 2016. On December 1st, 2017, Doom VFR, based on Doom 2016, was released. This is a VR version of Doom 2016, but don't be upset, they didn't even think about selling you the same game twice. Doom VFR is not just a VR version of the game, but a separate game made specifically for VR. The game has its own plot and some mechanics that are different from the original game. Let's start with the fact that the main character here is not Doom Guy, suddenly. We play as an UAC employee who got into an extremely unpleasant situation. He died. However, it's okay, the UAC transfers his consciousness into the matrix of an artificial brain and sends us to destroy demons and save the UAC center from demons. It's surprising that we don't play as Doom Guy, like in the other parts of the series. And this feels extremely strange, especially when your main character is so lively and talks a lot. In contrast, this feels especially alien. Some original mechanics of the game had to be adapted for VR. It turned out that now we have teleportation for moving over long distances, and glory kills have been replaced by kills by teleportation. The game has a chainsaw and firearms too. There are upgrades for guns, and even Argent Energy as an upgrade for ammunition and health is also here. The game also added a dash. I wonder why it wasn't possible to add it to the main game and the developers got to this only in Doom Eternal, but oh well. In fact, what's funny is that the game feels slower than the original. Well, that's not surprising. There are no jumps, only teleportation, dashes, free movement and various enemies. The demons we're already used to, by the way. Moreover, they still attack and move quite quickly. It's funny that the game's plot ends where the most interesting part of Doom 2016 began. Of course, I don't fully understand in what specific time period the events of the game take place. Maybe somewhere before Doom 2016, maybe in an alternative universe of Doom, I don't know, but the game itself feels and looks pretty decent. The movement mechanics and weak storyline were criticized. Reviews for the game were mixed, and you may have heard more bad than good about it, but I think that's because Doom players are just not really used to this type of gameplay. Anyway, now about what I love more than Doom 2016, something that has a special place in my heart. Announced in 2018 and released on March 20th, 2020, Doom Eternal became the standard for an arcade shooter. The project was directed by Hugo Martin and the producer was Marty Stratton. The new game was even faster, brighter, and more colorful. There were even more improvements, collectibles, new demons appeared, and the old ones returned to their designs of past years, but in an updated style. In this part, every game element was designed to increase the speed of the player. If in the previous part we were added a double jump, then in Eternal they would also give us a dash, allowing the player to dodge and quickly move around the location. Unlike the previous part, the arenas of Doom Eternal were more closed. As soon as you enter the arena, it is immediately blocked by barriers, limiting the player. It will no longer be possible to simply escape from the arena or to run past another horde of demons as in the previous part. A new combat feature gave the game its special features, weak spots. Now each demon had a special spot that had to be knocked down first in order to neutralize the demon or make it weaker. So killing the same Pinky from the front became much more difficult because of his strong plates on its body. But if you shoot from the side of its unprotected tail, the demon immediately flew into pieces. The behavior of the demons, by the way, has remained about the same, although now their fights look more stupid. Now, however, the demons do not damage each other, so watching them fight from the sidelines in the hope that they will kill each other will not work. What a disappointment. Also, the damage in close combat has been reduced to the lowest point possible. Now, a regular punch will simply stun the enemy for a short time rather than cause damage. However, a blood punch has been added to the game, allowing after a series of glory kills to smash a whole crowd of opponents with one blow. Well, or you can take out a Pinky with one blood punch, it's up to you. Along with the demons' features, their design has also changed. Now the enemies have become more cartoonish and bright, which not all the fans of the series liked. The game as a whole has moved away from the dark and dirty atmosphere that has become lighter. Also now, in addition to revealing the history of Hell and Earth, we will also be allowed to get acquainted with the sort of a cult of the Night Sentinels, and will reveal its history a little. It all looks like a very beautiful fairy tale, to be honest. Well, if you do not count the various demons who want to rip you apart. But it doesn't matter. Better look at what landscapes there are. Yes, landscapes in Doom Eternal are a separate art form. The game's locations are completely diverse, bright and beautiful. It feels completely special. Let's take a break from the beautiful views and return to the arena. After all, in addition to the old familiar demons, a bunch of new ones have appeared here, and very old acquaintances have also returned. Hello, Archviles. Yeah, perhaps the most disgusting demon of the entire series has returned here in all its glory. In addition to this, a cast of unpleasant demons has been joined by marauders, cyber demons, pain elementals, and many others. Arachnophrones have also been brought back. These spider-like guys can actually climb to the ceiling, but unfortunately this is rarely featured in the game. Mancubi have become faster and more dangerous, revenants are louder and more disgusting, and so on and so forth. The only disappointed was probably the cyber demon. Oh, what is this? Buddy, how are you? Okay? No, I understand that his design was taken from the old parts, but not only does he look stupid against the background of other demons, but he's not even a boss. More like a mini-boss, and I don't really want to call him that. The game also featured bosses, some of which were even used as mini-bosses in other arenas. For example, Doom Hunter has a whole level with a huge introduction, where we were shown how our future enemy is assembled. Not like it's very difficult, but it's a very cool introduction to the boss. In general, the bosses in the game are extremely well done, especially the final one, especially for the true fans of the series. Well, you get it, right? It's the Icon of Sin! Of course it was in the previous parts, but only as a big head, and another time an Easter egg. And here it's a whole boss with a separate level and even some kind of plot part. The most epic battle in the entire game. In general, the whole Doom Eternal feels like one big, epic, exciting battle. And it's the coolest thing I've ever played, seriously. For me, personally, there is not a single game of this genre that would be better than Doom Eternal. Especially if you consider the collectibles. There are so many secrets here that your head will spin. There is something for everyone. Albums, upgrades for the main character and modifications for weapons, runes, collectible figures. There are even cheat codes. And as a bonus, there are timed secret encounters and more difficult type of arena, the Slayer's Gate. There is so much content here that I didn't even know what to grab first. Well, at least the shelf looks beautiful. By the way, these figures were once sold in reality, and you can still find them. I need to think about collecting the whole collection, especially the Alopraten, the Lost Soul, and Pinky. Well, look at how cute they are! Oh, and by the way, I completely forgot. Now we have a base. Yes, now Doomguy lives in the old Sentinel base, which he himself updated. And now our old friend Vega is also with us and will be until the very end of the game. Hayden will also return, but rather forcedly. I would like to send him to scrap metal, but unfortunately that's not allowed. Not now, at least. So the game has become much faster, more diverse and brighter. All this has delighted the players, especially since not so long ago the game got a level editor and official modification support. But more on that later. By the way, the game also has multiplayer, but it's simpler and I wouldn't say it's really good. In short, Doom 2016 was better. The soundtrack in the game was also made by Mick Gordon, but it was his last work with Bethesda and It. There was a big scandal between the composer and the companies, which I don't want to go into details about. Just know that I'm on Mick's side in this situation, and like many others, I regret that we were left without such a great composer who gave the world to such beautiful OSTs. The soundtrack itself in the game is, of course, mind-blowing. Sometimes I listen to it while I work. I especially love the OST of the Cultist base and the battle with the Gladiator. In general, Doom Eternal blew up the community and pleased the audience, but that was not all. Just a year after the release of Doom Eternal, a story DLC for the game was released in two parts. The Ancient Gods Part 1 and The Ancient Gods Part 2. And this DLC beat up the players with new versions of demons, new obstacles and locations, and basically everything new. Initially, the first part was released on October 20th, 2020, and the second on March 18th, 2021. The main goal of the game was essentially to defeat the local evil, the Dark Lord. More pathos, to be honest, than action. In fact, I will not spoil much for now, rather in order to tell you about all this in more detail and clearly later. This part complements the universe of Doom more from the side of the ancient creatures, seraphims and makers, and tells their story more, it seems to me, than talks about demons. This, however, doesn't mean that our opponents will somehow change much. Old acquaintances, in the form of ugly demons, will still try to tear us to shreds. If only it was so easy. One of those enemies that no one wanted to see since the developments of Doom Eternal was also added here, invisible whiplashes. Who came up with this crap at all? Who in their right mind thought that this nasty invisible snake, which without invisibility is already hard to notice and kill, would be a great idea? What's even better is that now in some arenas fog gets in the way, which only interferes with the player. The fog does not affect the opponents. It is believed that DLC for Doom Eternal is more difficult than the main storyline, which is actually kinda logical. By that time, the player should have completed the main campaign at least once. Therefore, the player has some experience in fighting the main list of various demons. This means that they will also learn to cope with the new ones. Visually, the game amazes with a diverse atmosphere, which this time relies less on the bloody red arise of hell. And oh my god, how beautiful it is here. In short, yes, I was again stuck on the landscapes and could not take my eyes off for a long time. But let's be honest, it looks very cool. It also reminds me of Halo, to be honest. The game also has a hub, but now it is not Doomguy's base, but the structure of the Ark. It is here that Doomguy will really have a friend and companion, Intern. This boy has no name, but he is perhaps the most charming creature that Doomguy could meet. This is also the only real person in many years who will communicate with Doomguy as a friend. A very nice guy. I hope he will be returned in the future part. Well, not in the one that will be released soon, but in the one that will continue the story. Maybe. Game director Hugo Martin hinted at the continuation of the story of the Great Slayer in one of his interviews, telling also about the fact that they plan to supplement the story of Doom universe, and also hinted at the future reveal of some old acquaintances. I try very hard not to spoil the plot too much. It's obvious to me, right? Don't worry, sooner or later I'll tell you everything. To be honest, at this point, I just pray that they don't scrap all these ideas and Doom will have a continuation of a story. It is believed that at this point the story of the Doomslayer is over, obviously temporarily because he's not dead after all, but at the moment there is no continuation of the plot in sight. Before, however, we talk about what will happen next in the franchise and what is happening now, I must mention one more game. On March 23rd, 2023, the developers Alpha Dog Games, published by Bethesda, released a mobile game called Mighty Doom. Hey, stop laughing! Mighty Doom is the most stereotypical mobile game, a time killer for those who are bored in a subway or bus. In fact, it is a vertical side-scroller shooter with roguelike elements. The plot itself is much simpler compared to the main line of games, but at the same time it gives off something especially cute. A small figure of the Doomslayer comes to life and goes on search of his precious rabbit Daisy, making his way through crowds of demons and various bosses. All enemies and the Slayer himself visually match the toys/collectible figures from Doom Eternal. The game also has an energy system. In short, yes, the game would try to squeeze money out of you and force you to invest, if it could. On May 7th, 2024, the development studio was closed, which is why the development of the game stopped, and on August 7th, 2024, the game was completely shut down. The game is not available for download, and in-game purchases are disabled and subject to refund. But I still have it, but it still doesn't work. Says the servers are shut down, if you were wondering. Not that I liked it much anyways, but it was quite funny and will do just to kill time on the road. At the moment, the Doom universe continues to evolve. For example, in the summer of 2024, Doom Eternal got an update at QuakeCon, which added a level editor and official mod support. And off we go! People immediately ran to make their own maps. Moreover, some people made copies of maps from the classic Doom almost immediately. The community blossomed again and shone with a bright flame. In general, people were extremely delighted. However, this is not the only news that made people happy this year. Announced on June 9th, 2024, the first trailer for the new part called Doom the Darkages appeared at the Xbox Games Showcase. The bombastic trailer had been expected since May of the same year, and now, finally, the community was able to see for the first time what awaits them in the new part. The battles themselves have changed dramatically. The game, as they said, will be slower than the previous parts and will be more based on the ability to dodge attacks than to attack. And it is also a prequel to Doom 2016 and Eternal respectively. I managed to be one of who waited and watched this trailer live, and to be honest, then I even wanted to make a video where I would analyze the trailer with complete enthusiasm. But I decided to wait, so we're here now. I'm not just amazed and delighted, I am very amazed and delighted. The new part of the game is expected in 2025, and some information about it is already known. For example, that the glory kills will remain, but in a different format, more free and dynamic, and we will also be allowed to fly a dragon. Also, at QuakeCon 2024, there was a closed showcase of more gameplay features, information from which almost immediately hit the network. According to those present at the showcase, the Slayer will have 3 melee weapons to choose from, and the Saw Shield will have many different functions. In fact, there is quite a lot of news about the game, but we will be able to see everything ourselves very soon, on May 15th. And for all those who pre-ordered the premium edition of the game, on May 13th. I will consider it an actual honor to play and review this game, especially since this is part of my plans for this year. Doom is probably the coolest video game universe I have been able to immerse myself in. In fact, this is one of my favorite game series ever, and I was extremely pleased to tell you the whole story of this universe. The whole story is more than 30 years long, which still does not even think about ending. There are millions of Doom fans, and they all have one thing in common: the love of the art of rip and tear. Speaking of fans, honorable mentions. So, this video is almost over, but I can't leave you without a little bonus. What I'm going to talk about in this segment is the fan side of the Doom universe, mostly mods because that's where the Doom community shines the most, and isn't anything official. It's basically a collection of different mods. However, I think these mods are important to the fandom of the game, so I can't help but to mention them. Z-Doom. Let's start with what contributes to the emergence of mods on Doom and such creativity of the community. Z-Doom is a ported version of Doom with extended capabilities. The first version was released on March 1998. At the moment, support for the program has ceased. In addition to Doom itself, Z-Doom supported other games on the same engine. For a long time, this was the only way to create mods for Doom, and it was one of the pillars of Doom modding. Now Z-Doom has a successor in the form of GZ-Doom, and another port of QZ-Doom. CAC Awards. An annual awards ceremony for the best Doom VADs founded in 2004. The awards are held on Doom World if you were interested, and they still held to this day. The main category is the top 10 most famous Doom VADs of the year. The other categories are Multiplayer Awards, multiplayer-oriented VADs, Gameplay Mod Awards, VADs that change the core mechanics and gameplay of the original, Mock Award, Comedy VAD of the Year, Mordeth Award, Longest Development Time, and Worst VAD of the Year. The category was closed in 2011. CAC Awards is still an existing award that rewards the best mods and the best creative modders. It shows how creative the Doom community is. Well, let's run through my favorite / extremely popular mods in the community. Remember that this is only a small part of what community does. There are many more mods and maps, so I recommend checking out the videos at the link in the description. Brutal Doom. Bloody modification for Doom and Doom 2, made by Sergeant Mark IV. The modification itself is based on the Doom comic, which I mentioned earlier. The first version of the mod came out back in 2010, but the functionally final version came out in 2019. In February 2024, the last version of the mod was released, version 22. Brutal Doom is one of the most brutal and bloody modifications for the game. Only Project Brutality can be similar to it, which I will talk about later. Brutal Doom was distinguished by some changes to the mechanics familiar to Doom. For example, if in the original the enemies had one full hitbox, then in Brutal Doom there are already 3, one for the head, one for the body, and one for the legs. Naturally, new animations were made for the behavior of the enemies depending on the part of the body where the player hit, plus different behavior options for those cases when the enemy was killed on the spot and those when it was only wounded. The developer also managed to add new blood display system. You see, blood couldn't actually get on the floor or ceiling. It just so happened that this was the Doom engine system. Sergeant Mark got around this limitation by using three-dimensional objects with the required image. The developer also studied human anatomy and how much blood should be ejected with a particular injury. This made the modification a bit more realistic. At the moment, the modification is being updated. New weapons, sprites, etc. are being added. But the modification remains one of the most popular, cruel, and beloved by users. Project Brutality. Development began in 2015. The developers of the mod are Painkiller and the team of Project Brutality. The modification is compatible with Doom, Doom 2, and Final Doom respectively. In fact, Project Brutality is based on one of the versions of Brutal Doom, and is currently in version 3.0. Naturally, the mod makes the game more bloody and brutal. In addition to changing animations, enemies, adding blood, the HUD was also changed. To be fair, it now looks a bit like Doom Eternal. It's even cool, to be honest. I like it more than Brutal Doom. Project Brutality is the second most popular bloody modification for Doom. Doom also has acquired a large fan base from the horror segment. There are a lot of horror mods for Doom, and they often really keep you in fear and panic. Personally, some of them send me to getting Amnesia vibes, at least atmospherically. myhome.vad. On March 3rd, 2023, developer Steven Nelson created a mod that simply blew up the Doom community. A mystical horror puzzle, which at the same time is also a map modification for Doom, attracted people's attention extremely quickly, especially because of how surreal it was. In fact, I don't really want to talk about this mode in detail now. I would like to make a separate video on this topic sooner or later. The only thing I will say is that, as far as I know, the mod is based on the book called House of Leaves. And in itself, it is very atmospheric, creepy, and dramatic. I once tried to watch the analysis of this mod, but I didn't have enough nerves, so I think I will try to dive into it again later, when I'm ready. One thing is for sure, for me, this is one of the most amazing mod maps on Doom. Lasting Light. Stealth horror mod for Doom, depriving you of your only defense, weapons. Now you have a lamp in your hands like Amnesia, and behind you, somewhere in the darkness, whizzes a terrible monster, trying to grab you at any opportune moment for it. A creepy atmospheric mod that makes you feel vulnerable. Project Alopraten. I couldn't help but mention this modification. Perhaps one of my favorites on the horror theme. A creepy atmospheric modifications that distorts the enemies, forcing you to run in fear. The game works great on fear, and also slows down the player by forcing them to reload weapons and pick up items manually. I love the mechanics of the enemies and the animations they made for them. As for me, it's rather complex but creepy mod, which I would like to review separately in full. In addition to the creepy mods, the community didn't forget to fool around too. For example, Age Doom. I don't know if we deserved it, but we obviously wanted it. The mod was developed by Mike12, and it is an NSFW mod for Doom with corresponding animations. Naturally, I will not show you the footage of this mod, otherwise I will be banned. But I will just say that if you are already 18, then I advise you to check this mod yourself. It's quite funny. I usually take this kind of thing seriously, but even I chuckled a little. Extreme Doom. A funny mod that changes mainly the reloading and shooting of weapons. In fact, I recommend you to watch this showcase of this mod at the link in the description, because I myself cannot describe this masterpiece. No, seriously, I can watch it forever. There are many different mods and maps for Doom. I can't tell you about everything, but I think it was worth mentioning those legendary mods. Moreover, it perfectly shows how diverse and vibrant the Doom community is. It is precisely this that perfectly shows how a seemingly limited engine can be improved and changed beyond recognition. If you are interested in checking out more cool mods for Doom, I will leave a couple of links to videos with tops and mod compilations in the description under the video, and in the pinned comment. I checked these videos myself to find information, so I know what I recommend. The Doom community still creates great mods to this day that make Doom a whole new experience. After the official mod manager and level editor for Doom was added, people started making even more maps and mods, although they still need time to get going. On the other hand, the community managed to make custom master levels for Eternal even before the official level editor appeared. In general, the Doom community itself is a huge part of the history of Doom. This is one of the strongest and most united communities, which has been supported by the developers themselves since the release of the first part of the game. For me personally, this community has become perhaps a kind of a family, and I am sincerely glad that I'm a part of it. Phew. So, that's all I've got. Thank you all for watching this video. It was extremely pleasant and interesting for me to work on this video, despite the fact that it took a particularly long time. If you haven't put a like and/or comment yet, please do so. This is very important for the promotion of this video, and I will be pleased to receive such gratitude for the work I've done. Thanks again for watching. Have a nice one. Bye.